In this episode, Rainbow, and Supertramp.
1979, Rainbow, Down to Earth. Now, this is an interesting album because fans of Rainbow will all know that you had the Ronnie James Dio years, all the sword and the sorcery and all that sort of stuff and whatever. And then Richie Blackmore sort of decided, I want to move away from that now. Richie does get bored now and again, and maybe the fact that he did 3 albums of that, maybe we should be, instead of moaning that he didn't do more, be grateful that he did that many, because quite often he gets bored a bit quicker than that. If you think about it, like Deep Purple Mark III with Cordell and Hughes, he only stuck an album or 2 albums with them. Some people would say an album and a half. He only actually stood for 4 with the Gillan and Glover lineup of Deep Purple. So late 1978, Dio's out the door. Richie Blackmore wants a more mainstream sound. He wants to be a star in America again. He wants a big hit in America, and he doesn't think he's going to get that with the Ronnie James Dio on it, which is strange when you think about it. That Ronnie James Dio was American. Dio probably could have done that if he wanted to. Maybe there were 1 or 2 other things going on as well. There was a lot of angst going on between certain members of the band as well. I don't think Richie was too happy about the influence that Ronnie James Dio's wife had over things and all that. In fact, there's a story that suggests that after Ronnie James Dio had left Rainbow, and he says he left, Richie says he sacked him, there was a time then when they were looking at who they were going to get. And the first person they got in incidentally, which is quite bizarre if you think about it, well, obviously was Roger Glover. Now, why is that bizarre? Well, for those that don't know, which I'm guessing for the people that watch this channel, it's probably a very small amount of people. Back in 1973, when the second lineup of Deep Purple was about to come to an end, Richie Blackmore had said, well, if you get rid of Roger Glover, I'll stay. Just 5 years later, he wants to resurrect his band. He wants to turn his band into something else. Who does he turn to? Roger Glover. But he initially turned to Roger Glover to be the producer of the album, not the bass player. Now, I think the initial idea was for Roger Glover to come in and help write the songs and do the producing, and that was it. Obviously, that changed as time went on. What he's going to do next is going to find a singer. Now, there are suggestions that Ian Gillan was approached. That may or may not be true, I don't know. Probably is. David Coverdale, was he approached? Why would either of them jump ship from their bands that were just starting to make a bit of a splash to go back into a band with Richie Blackmore when they know what sort of control Richie Blackmore likes to have over stuff, and that they'd maybe been on the wrong side of that before? I don't believe, and I don't know, but I don't believe that either of those, Ian Gillan or David Coverdale, seriously ever contemplated joining Rainbow. Fairly certain they didn't, but allegedly they were asked. Pete Golby was another person who was asked, and apparently got as far as going down for a bit of a blow with them. How long that lasted, I don't know. Pete Golby, for those that don't know, at that point was in Trapeze. It's all this incestuous Deep Purple stuff, isn't it? He'd been in Trapeze, which was obviously the band that Glenn Hughes was in before he joined Deep Purple. Mel Galley was going to go into Whitesnake a few years later. Whether Pete Golby went down and had a go again, I think he probably did. I think him and Richie probably didn't get on, it didn't work. I don't know. Now, there's this story that Richie Blackmore remembered a band with a marble and a singer called Graham Bonnet. Now, he probably did, but all this romantic stuff was that isn't 100% right at all, because Graham Bonnet hadn't disappeared at all. He was around. He'd made a solo album just a year or so before with a lot of people who were involved in the same sort of music scene. Mickey Moody had played guitar on it for a start off. And he recorded it in London, so he wasn't a lost person who had to be tracked down. And I'm fairly certain as well that it was Roger Glover that found him, not Richard Blackmore. And they invited him down for a bit of a go to see if it worked. And Richard Blackmore decided, yeah, he did, he was okay. But he wasn't overly keen about the way the bloke looks, because he looked like James Dean. He didn't look like a rock star. I don't think it mattered that much in the end, because at the time, in fact, he may have done them some good thinking about it logically, because you've got all this sort of new wavy stuff coming in and all this whatever. And the fact that Rainbow had got a singer in a shirt and a waistcoat with a short haircut maybe made other people listen to it with a more open mind than they would have done if it had been a bloke with long curly hair and leather trousers and a waistcoat on. I don't know. The first single that came out was Since You've Been Gone, a Russ Ballard track, which again had been recorded by one or two other bands in the years before, and it instantly became it. Richie Blackmore got what he wanted. He was suddenly in the charts again. He was relevant to all that type of stuff. The second single, of course, which was All Night Long, was far more down a sort of rock route, especially sort of lyrically and all that sort of stuff. But because in those days it was a case of, oh yeah, that's a band that had a hit before we like them, and it was good. So where does that actually put this album in the sort of whole scheme of Richie Blackmore's career and a rock concert? Because I don't think a lot of people realise that this one and the one that came after it, which obviously had a different singer on it, Geraldine Turner, they were like albums that had hit singles on, and the pop people were playing them, and they were being played on the radio and stuff all the time. But what about the rest of it? The rest of it is what you would necessarily expect if you were a Rainbow fan to come from a Rainbow album. It's not all Since You've Been Gone, and there's some serious tracks going on here with some great guitar in Lost in Hollywood. It's the opening track, well, I want the opening track, Eyes of the World, is the track that used to open the live shows. Should have opened the album, really. I'm sure if they were given a chance to redo it, they would make Eyes of the World the opening track, but maybe the beginning of that was a little bit too much like Tara Woman from Rainbow Rising, and I thought, well, maybe not. But it would be fascinating to go back in time and see all those sort of pop people who heard Since You've Been Gone and All Night Long on the radio, and then brought this album on the back of that, and then after they got into things like Eyes of the World and then Making Love and Lost in Hollywood at the end of the track, at the end of the album as well, and Love's No Friend, and all those. I mean, they're proper sort of rock tracks for a proper rock sort of album. They're not anything like pop bands were putting out at all. So it's like there's probably a ton of people who bought this album on the basis of those two singles, who shoved it in a cupboard and never played it ever again, because the rest of the album didn't sound like the two singles. So it's a funny old album, that, and sometimes if you're a Rainbow fan, if you're a Richie Blackmore fan, this is an album that you can overlook, because you can think, oh, All Night Long and Since You've Been Gone. But I always sort of come back to it when I listen to the live stuff. I've got a a live box set a while ago. I'll just pause it here and I'm going to go and fetch it. Hold on. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Oops. Well, I'm on there. Rainbow Down to Earth Tour. Now this is a CD box set. CD because it's smaller. Open a little box up. Velvet inside to the box. Lovely thing this. And then what have you got? Well, we've got a gig from Chicago 1979. We've got a gig from Denver 1979. And we've got a gig from Long Island 1979. And it's listening to these that actually make you realise just how good the tracks that were on that Down to Earth album were, because on it you've got Eyes of the World opens the thing up, then you've got Love's No Friend, then you've got Since You've Been Gone, then you've got All Night Long, then you've got Lost in Hollywood, and you've only got Man on the Silver Mountain and Long Live Rock and Roll later on. So obviously these are from gigs in America where they weren't the headline act, so they were only doing an hour or so, but they were concentrating on the Down to Earth album, and that's when you realise just how good the songs they are. And it's not just a case of this is Rainbow's pop album, if you like, because there's some great stuff on there. We've also got another thing of the Monsters of Rock set, because obviously Rainbow headline. This is how big Rainbow were at the time. They were chosen to headline the very first Monsters of Rock, which was obviously in 1980. This album came out in 1979. That ended up being, of course, the last album that Graham Bonnet did with Rainbow. But on there, there's one or two more of the older tracks, and also there's a cover version of Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, which is again interesting because Graham Bonnet had released that, or he recorded that on his solo album a couple of years before he joined Rainbow, so he wasn't that lost, was he? He was easily accessible to everybody, really. And stories abound, or whatever, that Rainbow recorded that and that was going to be released as a single at some point. I don't know how true that is. I don't quite know why you would release a single that long after your current album had been out. Maybe it was going to be on the next album, which obviously turned out to be difficult to cure, and it would have been on that because there were one or two covers on that album. Obviously, Since You've Been Gone was a cover as well. So this, let me get the right album back in my hand again there. This is very much it's a sort of morphing album, if you like. It morphs between the Dio stuff and the stuff that went later on. For some people, the Joe Lynn years went just a little bit too American, a little bit too radio friendly. This one is a perfect stepping stone between the two, because you've got those radio friendly Since You've Been Gone and All Night Long. But even saying that, All Night Long is pretty heavy, and lyrically it's probably not all that radio friendly if you think about it. The rest of the tracks, I think, with the possible exception of like No Time to Lose, that Richie Blackmore said was like that about rubbish. I don't mind it. I think it's all right. This is an album which is worth listening to in its own right. But you think about it as a stepping stone from the Dio to the Joe Lynn Turner, it sort of makes more sense if you think of it that way. There are some really good songs on here, and that if the band had stayed in the model that it was in, it would have become live staples for years to come. Back to the issue of the album. Now, this album came out as a limited edition. I think it was a limited edition, I don't know. On clear vinyl as well as black vinyl. But my copy, bizarrely, here's the cover. There's the inner cover. And there's the black vinyl. I've got just a plain white cover here. I've got a clear vinyl version in there as well. With the special sort of rainbow label in there. So, don't know how scarce the clear vinyl is. I don't think it's all that difficult to pick up. Most people say clear vinyl doesn't sound all that good. I've played the black vinyl and the clear vinyl, and they both sound fine to me. So there you go. Rainbow, Down to Earth. It's not just Since You've Been Gone and All Night Long, although they are a very special part of the Rainbow story. Tracks like Eyes of the World, Lost No Friend, Lost in Hollywood. Great tracks. And this is the last album, of course, to feature Cozy Powell. The only album to feature Graham Bonnet. So it was just Blackmore. What an area that went on. So next lineup of the band where Joe Lynn Turner came in. So yeah, don't dismiss this album because it's not got Ronnie James Dio on it. I know Graham Bonnet is a Marmite character. Some people think he's great, some people can't stand him. I have that issue with him sometimes. I think on this album he's brilliant. On his first two solo albums he was brilliant. Some of the later stuff that he did I can't listen to it, it's just wailing to me. But on this, top notch. And also, I've got a, just because of the way that I am, I've just got this sneaking admiration for the bloke because he wouldn't conform and he wouldn't grow his hair and he wouldn't change his style. And he went, that's me. You wanted me to come in and sing, and that's what I look like. You like it or you lump it. So maybe Graham Bonnet is one of the people who challenged Richie Blackmore the most, because who knows? He didn't conform, did he?
The Man in the Attic.
Hello there, and welcome to The Man in the Attic. And this was 1974's Crime of the Century, again on A&M Records, but this time it was co-produced with a guy called Ken Scott. Now, if you know anything about rock history, Ken Scott has worked with loads of people. He was a studio engineer on lots of the Beatles recordings, Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, things like that, Abbey Road even, so he knew his way around a control room. And he'd also worked with David Bowie. He produced Hunky Dory. He produced a couple of Elton John albums. So yeah, he knew his stuff, and he was brought in to co-produce with Supertramp. And they had changed personnel again on this album. We still had the two main men, which are Richard Davis on keyboards and vocals, and Roger Hodgson, who played some keyboards and some guitar on the album that we're looking at. On the previous albums, Roger Hodgson had played bass. So there are three new members for Crime of the Century. Were Bob Benberg on drums, John Anthony Halliwell on saxophones and clarinets and some vocals, and Dougie Thompson on the bass. So with this lineup, they got together at Rampart Studios, which is the Who's studios here in Battersea, and it is very close to where I live, about a mile away. And they also used, I think it was Trident and Scorpio Studios in London as well. And yes, this album proved to be their commercial breakthrough. I mean, they went on to sell bigger amounts with later albums, but this album sold a good lot of copies. I mean, as a band over their total career, Supertramp have sold over 60 million albums, so that's no small potatoes. But what's this album like? Well, I think with this, they began to get more of the Supertramp identity that became more recognised later on. They had a hit single on it with in the UK with Dreamer, but in the States the best known track would have been Bloody Well Right, which was quite often played on FM, AM radio stations over there. But the album's got a great feel to it overall. I describe it as one of those albums that will yield more of itself on repeated listenings. It's got, obviously, on Dreamer, that very recognisable Supertramp keyboard sound that it's a electric piano, which became quite used by them quite a lot. But yet, although they'd had some brass instrumentation on their previous record, Indelibly Stamped, it came more to the fore on this with the introduction of John Anthony Halliwell as the brass player. And yes, it's a good album, quite dark in some of its lyrical themes. Although it's not fated as a concept album, it's kind of got a very unified feel to it. So I think you can look at on it in that kind of light, as there's a loose concept running through it. Quite dark lyrical themes in some. Reminiscent for me of a little bit of Roger Waters on The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon. And Dark Side of the Moon had been the year before, so maybe it was a little bit of an influence, who knows. But Ken Scott, as producer, had worked the previous year. He had produced Ziggy Stardust. So, yeah, again, a good producer, man. He's done a lot of good stuff. Maravishnu Orchestra, Billy Cobham, lots of people. But yes, a good album, this. All in all, a very good album. Then you've got the lyric sheet from the inside. And I think it's the lyrics on that are in white are the songs or lines that are sung by Roger Hodgson, and the ones in yellow are the ones that are sung by Richard Davis. Now, whilst I wouldn't describe either of them as the greatest singers in the world, they had an identifiable sound. They're not bad singers, not by any means. And also this album features some very, very nice quite subtle orchestral arrangements. But yeah, again, as I said, it's an album I think that will yield more of itself with repeated listenings. Bloody Well Right's a great tune. Dreamer as well. All of them good. And again, yeah, if you've never listened to it, and it was quite a big seller, try and get yourself a copy. It's got a really good sleeve as well. Identifiable straight away. We'll remember this sleeve. Yes, a good album all in all. For me, although Ken Scott had worked with Elton John, I can hear kind of shades of some Elton John compositions in this. So Supertramp, this was the start of their really successful phase, which was to go on into the late 70s and on into the 80s. And it wasn't until 83 Roger Hodgson left, and the band continued on until 1988 when they broke up. They have reformed periodically since then, but that's sort of a little brief overview of Crime of the Century. A good album. If you haven't got it, go for it. So we're looking at the follow-up album to Crime of the Century, and which was released in 1975. Again, it's co-produced with Ken Scott, and it's this one, Crisis, What Crisis. This was recorded principally in America. The band were pressured by the record company after the success of Crime of the Century. We want to follow up. Record companies sort of kind of did that at the time. They pushed bands, sometimes too much. And I think I've read from my little brief bit of research on this that Supertramp found that they felt they were hurried into this, and they didn't have a lot of material ready. They had some leftover songs from Crime of the Century, and they did write a few new ones. They hadn't had time to rehearse properly because they were on the back of touring Crime of the Century. But I think because Crime of the Century had kind of broken them in America, the pressure was on them for the follow-up. So we got this Crime of the Century. One of my favourite album sleeves ever. I just think it's a superb concept. The album sleeve, really like it a lot. I think for me, it's up there with my favourite sleeves. I mean, I have got albums where I like the sleeve, but the album's not that great. But yes, but that's not the case with this one. I think in this we find them going perhaps slightly more commercial in their approach, and not a bad thing all in all. Brass was used a little bit more on this. There were still some orchestral parts, but not quite as many as on Crime of the Century. Perhaps shorter songs than this, because I think on Crime of the Century, let me just check, we had 8 tracks. Yep, 8 tracks, and on this there are 10. It's a very slightly longer album, only by a couple of minutes. So perhaps the songs were getting shorter and perhaps a little more focused. There weren't really any hit singles from this. I think probably the closest to would have been Sister Moonshine, which had that nice kind of 12-string guitar on it, which would be used again probably later to great effect on Give a Little Bit, which was a big hit later on in the 70s. So yes, under the pressures that we're under, this album's really very good. I like the production, as with Crime of the Century. It's a stellar production because, you know, that they had a man with them who not only knew how to produce, he was a very, very practiced engineer as well, so he knew how to get the best out of this band and how to get the best out of the songs. Again, kind of shades probably of his productions with Bowie and Elton John, but again, is that a bad thing? Well, no, but again, you know, very, very English in their approach. Supertramp, probably vocally better on Crisis What Crisis than they were on Crime of the Century. Again, there's the rear sleeve, chilling out on a beach in LA or somewhere like that probably, but there we go, there they are in front of a nice advertising hoarding, whether it's the States or here, I don't know. This was recorded principally in the States, A&M Studios in Los Angeles, but again they finished it off. They continued the sessions here in London, again at Rampart Studios, and completed at Scorpio Studios in London in the autumn of 1975. So as I said, they felt pressured with it, but I think they coped with that pressure very well and delivered again a very, very good album. In fact, although they weren't keen on it at the time, I read that Roger Hodgson went on to say in the 80s that it was his favourite Supertramp album. I don't know, but yes, musically fairly similar to Crime of the Century, but perhaps with a more commercial bent to it. Crime of the Century, and again this one, I think, like I said with Crime of the Century, rewards a repeated listen because their songs aren't kind of in your face, kind of prog rock or anything. They're more subtle, and I think again would reveal more of themselves with repeated listenings, and I kind of like albums like that you can grow into. I mean, yes, we all have those albums which we hear and they have an immediate effect on us and we think, gosh, that's brilliant. But you get others where maybe on first listen you go, yeah, okay, but not too impressed. But then you will listen to them later on and find more in them. And I think this, again, like Crime of the Century, Crisis What Crisis falls into that category. The songs would grow on you over time. Again, yes, a very English approach, but not bad for that. nonetheless, and produced, very, very well produced by Ken Scott. I think after these two albums, they went on to self-production again. But perhaps they, by that time, were more confident, were more sure of what they wanted. But on these albums, that guidance of someone with a lot of studio experience benefited them greatly, and perhaps even more so in the songwriting, because they were learning their songcraft better. The first two albums are very English proggy albums, lightweight proggy albums of their time. But yes, Crime of the Century, and this one, Crisis, What Crisis? There we go. One more look at the sleeve. Fabulous sleeve.
We
Really
hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like and subscribe as it will help the channel to grow.